Hello, this is Josh Kilroy. I'm the host of the Fair Deal Democrats podcast. I am grateful to have my guest, Joseph Fedorko, here today. I have known Joseph. I think we met maybe in two. Were you active in DFA back then?
Actually sounds about right, and that's sort of mortifying that I've been around for that long at NDFA, but yes. And
Absolutely. Where are you guys meeting these days?
we are now located in a new bar called Platform 47. We meet every second Wednesday of the month there with a 6:30 gathering and then 7 o'clock meeting where we listen to candidates, then debate whether to give them an endorsement, which provides volunteer help, boots on the ground, door knocking. These days, lots and lots of texting. And it was really one of the first grassroots nuts and bolts organizing community-based organizing political organizations out there, particularly in the city, because we were still fighting the last Daley in office and trying to figure out how to get progressives into office. And so from 2006, it's been quite evolution, both in terms of how we've done and in where the city has gone. But and like I say, now we have working families and One North Side and the CTU and many other groups that do a lot of what we do, but not necessarily what we do. But we're kind of at an interesting point where we're trying to find a niche the new in the new realm in the city of Chicago.
Well, it is an entirely different context. You mentioned that Daley was still in office, but now we've had two progressive mayors in a row. We have a city council that is very progressive in many respects. And it's certainly due to the organizing of NDFA and some of the other organizations you mentioned. Do you feel like there was a particular tipping point or where progressives really gained more of the upper hand?
Whew. My first instinct is to pin it on the race after Rahm Emanuel retired, which ultimately became a Lori Lightfoot, Tony Preckwinkle
Right,
race. But I'm actually going to go earlier than that and say it was probably Rahm Emanuel's reelection campaign
right,
when what amounted to being the fourth choice of progressives, Chuy Garcia, managed to get him into a runoff.
right.
I think that was kind of a surprise. I mean, it was definitely a surprise. Like, Rahm, of course, did win with his fabled or infamous fuzzy blue sweater, but I think that was the crack. That's where I think we realize, that's where a lot of progressives realized that there are inroads being made, that it may be a matter of time, that the work of organizing and getting other races, both aldermanic and lower races. NDFA kind of cut its teeth with the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. That was our first big victory with Deb Shore winning.
Right.
But I think it was that runoff that really made people realize this is going to happen.
Well, as somebody who worked on Chewy's campaign, I could not agree with you more. That night where we forced the runoff may be the single most exciting night I've experienced in politics. Because the machine always is so mythical, right? So indomitable. And to see them forced into a runoff, it just showed, like you said, the cracks in the system. Get in there. And then 4 years later, I mean, Rahm decided not to run because I don't think he felt he could win.
And I'll go one step further. I think had Karen Lewis been healthy, she probably would have beaten Rahm in for re-election. Again, for those that may not know, Karen Lewis was the mayor, or not mayor, the president of the Chicago Teachers Union. She was one of the lead organizers. She was diagnosed with brain cancer, a brain tumor.
Right. Exactly.
Now, I don't know if she would have made a good mayor because I also do. I'm also an educator union. I'm president of an adjunct faculty union. And organizing for a union is very different than running a mayoral, running a city. Won't know whether that would happen, but even then, because I think that was part of the frustration of, well, we couldn't get Karen. Tony would not run. A lot of people thought she could have made a race
Right.
and kind of became Chewy to some extent by default, but there he was, and he ran a really solid campaign. And of course, he used it to get into Congress, where I think he's been
Right.
a quite good representative.
Oh, he is definitely a power broker at the national level among Latino constituencies. So, but I would say Karen Lewis specifically anointed Chewy as her replacement. And I think that's where a lot of the juice came from. She called him and said, I can't do it. You're the person. And she helped was one of the people to organize the early petitioning and stuff like that, and that early energy that was so important.
And of course, the power of the Hispanic voters,
Yeah,
which I think had been very untapped at that point in Chicago.
exactly. But you raise an excellent point that I want to build on. Being a union organizer is very different than being the mayor of Chicago. We have a union organizer as the mayor of Chicago. How do
We
you feel
do.
Brandon has done so far?
Not very well. I think, and I'm certainly not alone with a lot of other friends. And he was not necessarily my first choice in the primary, because, of course, as you know, Chewy came in very late and tried to run as well. But I mean, it's interesting because you also mentioned Lori, and we've had the progressives have figured out a way to get back to back progressive mayors. And I think one of the things we in Chicago are probably in the progressive community are going to need to confront is why have they not been as good a mayor as we would like them to be? I didn't feel like he was ready. The rumor I had heard was that he was running essentially to get his name out there to perhaps run for Congress or even Tony Prickwinkle for Cook County Board. But he's a terrific communicator. I mean, he was a talk show host, a really good one. And it was kind of a right place, right time. And it was also really helpful that his main opponent, Paul Vallis, ran against Tony Preckwinkle as opposed to running for mayor of Chicago. So when they both beat Lori in the primary, everybody kind of looked at Vallis and go, "Oh yeah, you were the guy that nearly bankrupted Chicago schools. Yeah, we don't want you." It's the only runoff I ever remember where the guy that won or the person that won actually lost votes in the runoff. But I think Brandon made some mistakes with some of the people that he hired to run, that he picked to run the departments. I think there's certain, there's as a friend of mine likes to put it when he talks about bad NFL coaches, he has to feel like he's always the smartest guy in the room, meaning
Right.
he's not building coalitions that he actually might do and might have done as a union organizer. And I think he's just been a little slow to learn on the job. As I get older, I get more and more impressed by people who grow into the job, who grow during the campaign, and who keep, my in my local aldermanic camp, the 48th ward, and our alderwoman Lenny Hoppenworth was someone like that. When she first started running, she just was just very awkward and repeated some of the same lines over and over in a very robotic way, but she grew in the campaign. She's been, I think, a very effective alderperson. She has followed through on her promises. followed through on what she said she was going to do, and is always communicative. And her people are very communicative in an honest way. I don't think Brandon's doing the same thing, and so I think he's very vulnerable.
Right, and he tries these weird power moves, most notably with CPS. Pedro Martinez, the superintendent, the president of the board there. That was bungled from the get go, and for really a bad reason. I mean, that loan they wanted to take out to cover, operating expenses. I mean, that was a poor act, and to follow up with just such a heavy hand.
And
Um,
then he spends his time trying to get a Bears stadium that nobody really wants, and
right.
there isn't a place to put it. And let it, go build in Arlington Heights. It's a very puzzling thing. He had so much energy on the ground. I mean, it's interesting because he also has a lot of older people that he brought with him. Again, very open. I was volunteering and on the kitchen council for someone who ran and lost to a candidate who got Brandon's endorsement, and that particular alderwoman has been kind of, the joke is she here? Has anybody seen her? And she was just so attached to Brandon. It makes me wonder whether older people like her are also going to be in trouble. I'm not quite ready to start entertaining who's going to run against him, but I'm sure it's going to be another crowded field, and I won't discount him for potentially winning depending on who runs, but I think he's got a very high hill to climb.
Right. I'm a little surprised that people haven't been more visible to, sort of announce themselves as potential candidates. I hear Bill Conroe, the 34th word, might be looking at it.
Andre Vasquez in 40th is
Andre
pretty
Vasquez.
rumored.
Yes.
I Susana Mendoza is another name I've heard, and she was part of your Lightfoot and ran off. Uh,
I'm sure somebody at some point will dust off Tom Dart or Bridget Gaynor, give them a chance to say yet again that they're not interested.
Bridget's name had been kicked around during to see whether she might run for Jan Schakowsky's seat,
Right.
which is because that's Jan's my house rep, and I'm telling people, hey, we get to be in Ohio for a few months. There are already 6 declared candidates and 2 or 3 others that have been rumored that people are waiting to find out if they'll jump in. So, and Bridget was one of them. I don't think she is. In fact, I know someone that's actually running for her seat, but that's another interesting name. And I'm sure there'll probably be some wealthy business person because there always is, isn't there?
Right. Right. I like Laura Fine. I have to be with Daniel Biss just personally. So,
That's
but
certainly where I'm leaning. We're lucky that we have 3 under 35, if not under 30 declared candidates. 2 of
right.
them actually live in the district, which is helpful. One does
Right.
not, and she
Right.
is getting lots of internet buzz, which is somewhat annoying. But
Yes.
and then again, there are 1 or 2 people whose names I won't drop right now, just
Sure.
because if that person runs, there's somebody else I know that would be running for that. A lot of dominoes that could potentially fall depending on if anybody else comes in. But it's going to be quite a race. It should actually be a fun one. I say that now.
Right. Well, I don't know. I'm curious to see how Jan plays this. I suspect she wants to be with Daniel, but I think there are other candidates who,
I'd be shocked if she endorses.
yeah, I don't know. She has a record of endorsing. She's always been very cognizant of her legacy and her power. I don't know. We'll see.
She's already aided. I know she's helped Laura Fine. I know she's helped Dan Biss.
Right.
It would be tough to sort of like, you're the child I like most, that kind of thing.
Sure, sure. Well, we just had a big mayoral race. It wasn't here in Chicago, but certainly people are buzzing about it. Do you have any thoughts on Zohran Mamdani's big victory in New York?
Yeah, I was actually took some time with all the various places all the various Substacks I subscribe to. Everybody's doing thought pieces today. And honestly, now that it's sort of settled, I think on one level, it's kind of a story that we've heard before, where you have a smart incumbent or a smart insurgent campaign
Right,
who takes advantage of a lot of organizing, takes advantage of some clever marketing. And, I did not realize that Mandami's mother was Nira Mayer, who made
right,
Bombay and Mississippi Masala, which was pretty cool. But he went out and beat a complacent, old school candidate who wanted it because, well, I'm a Cuomo. Why
right.
not? And he ran a bad campaign. You could probably tell at the end because he was calling in all the chits to try to get over the top, which turned out to just fall right into place with Mandami's argument. And why, and I did, because I am a nerd, I did find some New York coverage, and you could tell Cuomo knew he was, it was, hats off to him. And I saw the Bollywood ad that he did, which was both that Mandami um, did, that both criticized Cuomo and very cleverly talked about how to vote using ranked choice voting.
Yes.
That was just very, very clever.
Yeah,
So hats off to him, right?
he ran a great campaign.
He ran a great campaign.
And that young organizer model, I think, is really caught on. And I have mixed feelings about it precisely for the reason you mentioned. I don't know that it leads to good governance, but it has been a successful electoral strategy.
Yeah, we don't. Well, first of all, he has to win in November.
He does.
And we don't, as we now know, we don't count anything until, in fact, I was even told people, technically he hasn't won yet. Because of ranked choice, we have to wait for the second and third waves. But the third place finisher Lander, I think, is positioned. And I think it sure feels like if Mandami wins, Lander's going to have a prominent part, which I think if you're a New Yorker would be very pleasing. But
Right.
we know what's going to come because we know what kind of money and attitude Adams is going to have. And Curtis Lee was still around again. Talk about
Good Lord.
old models. Good Lord.
I know.
I mean, geez, maybe,
Right.
but he's got to win. The attacks are going to be savage. I mean, from what I've read, Mandami has issues to answer for. Mamdani, I'm sorry, I apologize,
Yeah.
Mamdani.
Right.
But he has issues, particularly in the Jewish community, that he will need to address. And like you said, if he wins, best case scenario, he's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's starting to build up a little bit of a legislative record as well as everything else she's doing. Worst case, he's Manhattan Brandon.
Yes. And I do need to be upfront. I have encouraged people to organize against Mendami just because I do feel the downside is I do believe he's really anti Semitic. And so I'm very concerned about that. I'm very concerned about the housing policy. Anyways, I don't want to get into it. I do want to acknowledge that he ran a great campaign. People are excited, you know, and my hat's off to him.
And it continues where he will need to address everything you're pushing.
Right.
You make him address those. issues. Now, it feels like he has in the primary, so he's positioning himself well, but different animal. So how he responds.
And, to his advantage, he has maybe a politician worse than Cuomo to run against in the general.
Man, yes. Yeah, because Trump will be an issue.
Uh,
Yeah, we all like how Eric Adams is able to run.
right.
And in fact, I read today he did two Fox hits and Newsmax. So it seems pretty clear where he's going.
Yeah, it is. The establishment disgraced themselves. There's no question about it.
Oh, I'm sorry, again.
Yeah, there were people with good ideas. They got no traction because they didn't understand the landscape, particularly around social media, the way that Mamdani did. Um,
There was, and actually, I just read. I mean, one of the people I read was Paul Krugman, which, and I love this point. He said, "Look, there's no problem. There's nothing inherently wrong with running centrist Democratic candidates. There are centrist Democratic candidates in New Jersey for governor, and honestly, on a national level, those are both going to be bigger bellwethers for what's going to happen in 2026 than New York City mayoral." But
right.
having said that, Truman is like, look, if you want a centrist to run, get a better centrist. But if this forces some of the money and some of the strategists to get younger and take the good lessons out, again, with the organizing, the door knocking, the clarity of message, as opposed to, as somebody said, oh, he did a podcast, so the Democrats just need to do a podcast.
Back here in Illinois, Pritzker just announced for a third term. It's hard for me to get excited about him. I don't see him as a president. I know he looks in the mirror and sees a president looking back at him, but he's certainly been a good governor, certainly compared to Rauner before him, and even Quinn. I mean, I love Pat Quinn, but he was always so disorganized, whereas Pritzker sort of had these things buttoned down. Are you excited about Pritzker and where Illinois is?
I'm very happy with where Illinois is. There are definitely issues that still need to be taken care of. Transit is a big issue. Higher ed is a huge issue.
Right,
Um, I remember Pritzker's first couple campaigns, and again, compared to where he has worked his tail off to get much better as a campaigner, much better connecting with people, much better and much more fearless fighting for issues. I think that's what everybody is responding to because, among other things, he is a billionaire. He's the schlubby, as I call him, he's the schlubby oligarch. But and so I think that's what people appreciate. I think he will run. Vice president may be more of a slot. Of course, we remember he was talked about that in 2024. But he's a good, I mean, I feel much more secure living in Illinois with him compared to so many other places. I mean, I grew up in Ohio, and
right,
Lord knows that's a state I don't want to be in right now. They're turning into Midwest Mississippi in a lot of ways, and it's kind of frightening. So, and I also don't see any. I can't conceive of a Republican in the state that's going to give him a run, give him even a half-hearted run.
I think people feel that the ship of state sort of moving along steadily, and our values are respected. I mean, they, particularly with abortion, we're one of the national leaders in reproductive rights.
Rights and protecting trans rights.
Right? Absolutely.
I have friends with trans children, and I think about them constantly.
Right.
The attacks, and it is very heartening that he is so full-throated. And Mamdani as well. He was unapologetic, and that I think is what Democrats should be on that issue in particular.
Right. Right. So I do want to turn. We have a few minutes left. I admire the way you run your Substack. I wanted to just get your sense of how you approach this and where you get the energy to post almost every day. That's what really blows my mind.
Well, first of all, for those of you that are listening, you can find it is a easy to find Substack. It is called a Substack from a guy named Joe. And it's kind of an interesting evolution. So for about 15, 16 years, I had produced a political sketch comedy theater show that had become a podcast. And so I've always been sort of obsessed and keeping up with everything to the point where my Facebook feed just got so clogged with so many stories and friends that would get into arguments with my Trumper sister. I eventually started to just write stuff down into so I was sort of substacking on Facebook. That comes from the fact that I teach freshman English composition, including essay writing. And I always like to teach, and forgive me, there's going to be a little English lesson here, but the essay as a form was created by a French nobleman named Michel de Montaigne in the 16th century. And the idea was he was part of this thing called the middle class, which hadn't existed. And so he was in an odd position and not quite sure where to, just how to behave. And so he started to write in prose. He's one of the first people that did that. And he wrote about individual subjects for the purpose of kind of putting his mind together, just his thoughts on that particular subject, like how to behave in front of the royalty, how to act like a businessman. And he wrote it in such a way so that other people that were in the same boat as him, so to speak, might get something out of it. And the old French word essay literally means to try. So, what the Substack has evolved into is sort of me trying to be an essayist, not in a classic sense, but as a way to try to assemble and put together what is going on in the world in a sort of snarky, smart alecky, ADHD kind of piece. And so I actually now write 3 times a week. Comfortable both for me and for readers because I don't know how much people. I mean, I think people have to take breaks when trying to read about Trump and everything that's going on. But I make it fun of myself because I mean I have roots that are Ukrainian, so I've been very focused on the Ukraine Russia piece. Obviously, some Chicago politics, but I'm also a sports nerd, so I like to talk about sports. I like to talk about pop culture. I end each with lots of history of new things that happened on this date in history,
Right.
births, deaths and births of bad people, which I call Feed the Worms, and to add videos based on birthdays or so if you go to today's Substack, for example, we talk a lot again, talk about Mamdani, but also talk about not so much the Iran bombing, but the spin that Trump is applying to the Iran bombing, which I find amusing because I didn't find it amusing, I would be throwing bricks through windows. Day, op day, as
So, I do encourage people to read it. I'll link to it when I post this. It has a fun, frenetic energy to it. But you teach writing. I'm very concerned about the students coming into colleges these days. How are they as writers?
ooh, so yeah, that's a tricky because I also teach public speaking, and I mean that's very so generally the time people get to college, they do have some basic knowledge. The thing that everybody in higher ed is talking about inevitably is a and text generation, and how is that impacting people's teaching, and is it something that we have to try to fight by making everybody write in cursive and bringing back blue books, which I have friends that do, or
Right.
do we use it as a tool to help people writing? And I have friends that do that, and I'm still wrestling with it. I actually want to properly learn how to use AI in a couple different ways this summer. I have an
Right.
idea for my speech class to create a chatbot. Just in one of my spring speech classes, there was a particular class where I had four different students deliver word for word passages in a speech about, ironically, whether generative AI art can be considered art. And, the fact that we have to talk about, well, do they, how many, 'cause, I mean, of course, students are using it. There's no question they're using it. I would, if I
Right.
were 18, 19, to a point at least. And it's going to, and I have friends that I think they're close to getting ready to leave teaching because they just don't know how to do it or how to use it. And one of my schools that I teach at has their attitude is, look, in 5 years, students that are in eighth grade now will come and it will just be a tool, like Wikipedia was 20, 15, 20 years
Right.
before that, and Google was before that. And the good
Right.
students will write and create their own voice, and the bad students will use ChatGPT like they probably went out and bought papers and put their name.
I'm almost more concerned that they're not reading. Right. I mean, I'm really concerned about generating the thinking. I'm less concerned about the actual text in some sense, but I mean, without it's a different way of being in the world. And I'm wondering if the students you're seeing are reading or are keeping that critical thinking alive.
I think they are. I think the reading is different. I think we do need to include, and in one of the schools they talk about writing in the 21st century as going beyond text, but it does include images. It does include a sense of manipulation of the information, and how, and just thinking about how you put it together. We have many students that will use slides, whether it's PowerPoint or Google Slides or Canva, to create papers, which is not unusual. I have friends that are making six figures and they're told to create projects using slideshows as well. And so it's a different use of text, it's a different meaning of text. And as a
Right.
teacher, I'm still fascinated enough by it to make me confront it and just think, all right, well, how do we think about images and bullet points in the same way that we would just read books? People still read books. And people still, I mean, I still do a lot. I mean, I'm doing a lot of my reading online. You have to with Substack. I mean, in some ways, Substack is nothing more than old school. Particularly with so many journalists that are on Substack now, I'm kind of realizing there's enough journalistic talent on Substack alone to create a new network quite comfortably. Um, and that's also verbal, it's also talking, it's also podcasting. So we receive, and again, this is one of the things I'm learning, is we receive so much information in so many different ways that we kind of have to expand what the concept of reading is. It definitely still includes text. I think there is definitely something about reading text and taking notes that is conducive
Yes.
to learning. And, even back to my Substack, in the last couple months, I've started to use a simple little sort of pocket notebook to write ideas down, which I've never really done. as a writer. Because I think mostly because as a playwright, I tend to think in terms of dialogue, in terms of lines, and I will think of a line and I'll try to use it in conversation. And if it works and I get the laugh or something, that's locked into my mind so that when the time comes, it will be there. That line will be there and I can write it
Right.
down. Um, with um, with the Substack, I think part of it is again, there's just so much going on, and so quickly, especially at this particular moment, that it's just there's just and there's just no other way for me to stay focused again in that sort of classic try to understand the world, try to keep a toehold in um, try to keep a certain level of positivity in the world. I mean,
Right.
I sometimes worry about being too positive. I was too positive going to the 2024 campaign in retrospect, but I'm also old enough to know that there's no such thing as permanence, especially in politics. There's always another campaign. There's always a shift in the electorate and in how you message. And so people who think they've got it are the ones that are going to lose the next time. And so, even with Trump, this too shall pass, particularly during when he is no longer the center of the political world, which again could be 3 years, could be 3 hours. Um, Little point about the reading. The term is multimodal. There are multiple modalities that we now absorb information, and it's all about how we sort those modalities out, much less how we then respond, in what manner we respond with.
I think I want to have you back just to talk about that because I've been reading like Neil Postman and people like that.
Hmm.
You know, I'm a little bit skeptical that anything could really replace reading for the deep, sustained thought that I don't want to say the mid 20th century was a golden age, but I feel just for myself, my mind's rotting from all the scrolling I do, and that's just on Substack where I read smart people. So, like, even
Hmm.
the quality of what I'm reading, because of the medium, I feel the medium almost undermines it somehow. By
It's
prior,
not. I mean, it's not the same as if it were printed. Although I still read everything off like an iPad.
right.
I
Anyway, Joseph, you've been a great guest. I hope to have you back for joining me. I think it was a fascinating conversation.
Well, thank you for having me because I'll hop on a soapbox anytime.
So, thank you.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Bye.